Another in the series of presidential profiles, Richard M. Nixon, 37th President of the United States.
Therefore, I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow. Vice President Ford will be sworn in as president at that hour in this office.
On August 8, 1974, the people of America and television and radio audiences around the world heard those agonized words from President Richard M. Nixon. For the first time in history, an American president had resigned his office. The national consciousness was severely wrenched, but the American constitutional process, first put in motion almost 2 centuries earlier, never faltered for a moment. Richard Nixon was born in California. He graduated from Whittier College and from the Duke University Law School and opened a law practice in Whittier. He joined the Navy in 1942 and served in the Pacific Theater of Operations. Soon after his return to civilian life, he was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. He served 2 terms and was then elected to the Senate. He had developed a reputation as a strong anti-communist and was chosen as a running mate for Dwight Eisenhower in 1952. The Ike and Dick ticket won a sound victory, despite the embarrassment of a charge against Nixon that he had accepted large contributions from businessmen to finance his career. With the ending of the Korean War, President Eisenhower's personal popularity with the American people grew still greater. The same team was returned to the nation's highest offices by a landslide vote in 1956. No one can argue that the vice president's job offers either executive power or training. But Richard Nixon traveled widely, investigating international problems and meeting with world leaders. The Republican Party nominated him for the presidency in 1960, but his Democratic opponent was John F. Kennedy, and it was Kennedy's year. 2 years later, Richard Nixon met another defeat, this time in the race for the governorship of California. He declared that he was retiring from politics and became a lawyer on Wall Street in New York City. The retirement was never rigid and was probably never meant to be. In 1968, he accepted the Republican nomination, narrowly defeated Hubert Humphrey, and became the 37th President of the United States. In general, his first term inspired approval, if not affection, with the American people. He proclaimed the Nixon Doctrine, by which Asian nations would take care of their own defense, aided financially by the United States, but with a minimum use of American troops. In early February 1972, he reported to the nation on the progress of his efforts to end the U.S. participation in Vietnam.
This has been America's longest and most difficult war. It began long before I became president, and I have been doing everything I can honorably do to end it. I have brought almost 500,000 men home from Vietnam. As high as 300 a week were being killed in action when I took office. This week there were 2.
Within a year, through the tireless and seemingly miraculous efforts of Henry Kissinger, the president's chief foreign policy advisor, a peace treaty was signed ending the Vietnam War. Amid high emotion, prisoners of war were brought home. The military draft was ended, and the nation's armed forces changed to voluntary recruitment. The war in Asia was divisive, as few events in the nation's history had been. But with the treaty, respect for American policies began a new upward swing, both at home and abroad. In 1972, an election year, President Nixon made a historic journey to communist China. At the time of his departure for Peking, he spoke at the airport to a crowd of well-wishers.
We, of course, are under no illusions that 20 years of hostility between the People's Republic of China and the United States of America are going to be swept away by 1 week of talks that we will have there. But what we must do is to find a way to see that we can have differences without being enemies in war. If there was a postscript that I hope might be written with regard to this trip, it would be the words on the plaque which was left on the moon by our first astronauts when they landed there. We came in peace for all mankind. Thank you and goodbye.
The trip was a complete diplomatic success, and it probably marks the high point of the Nixon administrations. Upon his return, he spoke glowingly of his journey for peace.
Not only have we completed a week of intensive talks at the highest levels, we have set up a procedure whereby we can continue to have discussions in the future. We have demonstrated that nations with very deep and fundamental differences can learn to discuss those differences calmly, rationally, and frankly, without compromising their principles. This is the basis of a structure for peace, where we can talk about differences rather than fight about them.
A few months later, Richard Nixon traveled to Russia, the first American president ever to do so. His talks there made major progress in nuclear arms limitations, and Russia and the United States agreed to engage more extensively in trade and to plan joint scientific and space ventures. The atmosphere of détente that he had built with both Russia and Communist China were approved by the vast majority of Americans, and Nixon and his Vice President Spiro Agnew were returned to office in the fall of 1972 by one of the largest landslide victories in American political history. Then, less than 2 years later, he was forced to resign the presidency to avoid impeachment. Few presidents have ridden so high on a wave of public approval, and no other has ever fallen so low. His fall was caused primarily by the Watergate scandals. The ugly story actually began several months before the overwhelming victory of his re-election. 5 men were arrested after having broken into the Democratic Party headquarters in the Watergate building in Washington. The men had electronic eavesdropping equipment with them and were found to be employed by the committee to re-elect President Nixon. The president declared that no one on his staff was involved in the break-in. A few months after his re-election, a number of his closest associates were implicated to various degrees. Many highly placed men resigned their positions, including the Attorney General and the acting director of the FBI. Others were indicted by a federal grand jury. The president admitted that some of his men had committed unlawful acts and that there had been an attempt to cover them up. But he maintained that he himself knew nothing of the break-in before it took place and that he had not participated in the cover-up. Soon it was revealed that most of the president's private conversations had been tape recorded, and a Senate investigating committee subpoenaed the tapes. The president refused to release them, claiming executive privilege, and stating that the release of private tapes would damage the effectiveness of future presidents. He eventually yielded to mounting pressures, and some tapes were turned over to the committee. Further investigations elsewhere revealed irregularities in the financing of the president's re-election campaign. Then, in October 1973, Vice President Agnew was accused of failing to report his full income on a federal tax return. He pleaded no contest and resigned the vice presidency in the national interest. Nearly 2 months passed, and at last, Gerald Ford, Minority Leader of the House of Representatives, was appointed to the nation's second highest post. Meanwhile, President Nixon's support with the public and in Congress gradually deteriorated, and demands for his impeachment grew louder. He was obliged to release still more tapes. One of them proved that he had personally taken part in the cover-up, and that he had done so within a week after the break-in itself. His position collapsed. Facing almost certain impeachment and conviction by Congress, President Richard M. Nixon resigned. In relinquishing the office to Vice President Ford, he expressed some sentiments that were shared by all Americans.
As we look to the future, the first essential is to begin healing the wounds of this nation, to put the bitterness and divisions of the recent past behind us, and to rediscover those shared ideals that lie at the heart of our strength and unity as a great and as a free people.
Another in the series of presidential profiles, Gerald R. Ford, 38th President of the United States.
Vice President, are you prepared to take the oath of office as President of the United States? I am, sir. If you will raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Gerald R. Ford, do solemnly swear. I, Gerald R. Ford, do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States, and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. So help me God. Congratulations, Mr. President.
In the White House on August 9, 1974, Vice President Gerald Ford and Chief Justice Warren Burger faced each other before the microphone and TV cameras of the world's news media. With this brief ceremony, Gerald Ford became the first man in American history to attain the presidency without having been elected to that office or to the vice presidency. Gerald Ford was born in Omaha in 1913. He grew up in Grand Rapids, Michigan, graduated from the University of Michigan, and earned a law degree at Yale. Soon after being admitted to the Michigan bar, he joined the Navy and served throughout World War II. He returned to Grand Rapids and in 1948 was elected to Congress from that district. He was appointed to the Warren Commission, which investigated the murder of President Kennedy. 2 years later, he was elected Minority Leader of the House of Representatives, and he continued in that position until he was called to a higher office. The Watergate scandal burst upon the country in June of 1972. In the midst of President Richard M. Nixon's troubles with that mounting series of crimes, Vice President Spiro T. Agnew broke into newspaper headlines across the country. He was accused of failing to report certain income on his federal tax returns. He pleaded no contest to the charge, and on October 10, 1973, he resigned his office. President Nixon nominated Gerald Ford as his new vice president. Both houses of Congress minutely and publicly examined the man and his background. Both houses voted overwhelmingly for his confirmation in the country's second highest office. He remained in that post only 8 months. Vice President Ford repeatedly expressed his support of President Nixon, but the horrifying revelations of Watergate flowed on, with a tide of suspicion and guilt rising higher and higher in the administration. After a long, losing battle to keep possession of tape recordings of his private conversations, President Nixon was finally forced to admit that he had participated in the attempted cover-up of Watergate. By the end of July 1974, it was apparent that the president had lost the support of both Congress and the American people, and he resigned on August 8th. No other president in our history had ever done so before. Gerald Ford was sworn in the next day as the nation's new president. Following the ceremony, he spoke these heartfelt words.
My fellow Americans, our long national nightmare is over. Our Constitution works. Our great republic is a government of laws and not of men. Here, the people rule.
From the start, President Ford seemed to be an uncomplicated man whose openness and honesty were very welcome in the federal government. A month later, gambling that his popularity would survive a highly controversial move, he granted ex-President Nixon a full pardon for all offenses against the United States. The initial outcry was enormous, but eventually, with the Watergate affairs in the hands of the courts, economic problems and international issues absorbed the attention of the people and their new president. At the end of his first speech to a joint session of Congress, he made a simple declaration to the people of his goal and his faith. No chief executive could be more straightforward. No nation on earth could ask for a clearer credo.
Fellow Americans, one final word. I want to be a good president. I need your help. We all need God's sure guidance. With it, nothing can stop the United States of America.